Welcome to Red Chameleon. If you like the video, please smash the like button. Today's Askreddit question is, Surgeons of Reddit, what was your oh-hit moment? Let's get started. I was doing a corneal transplant when I had the oh-hit moment. During surgery, I cut off the patient's own cornea and replace it with a new donor cornea. During that moment when the host cornea was off, but before I could get the new one on, there's literally nothing on the front of the eye, except a tear film and aqueous humor. Anyway, the patient takes that moment to start vomiting. The reason we tell everyone to skip food and drink is so they don't aspirate in case they throw up. This patient lied about eating breakfast and started throwing up everything. The eye is still open sky at this time. Everything inside of the eye can now become outside of the eye, and she's bucking and vomiting. Those not in the know will say this is not good. Those really in the know will say oh hit. Anyway, I had to grab the new cornea and start stitching as fast as I could on a patient actively throwing up. I used 10-0 nylon sutures, which are thinner than an eyelash. It turned out okay but not great. Don't lie about eating breakfast before surgery, folks. Doing a C-section for this poor mom who'd been in labor for hours. The baby wouldn't come out of the hole we'd made, so more pressure was applied to the fundus, top of the uterus, and suddenly whoosh. Baby zooms out like a torpedo, covered in lubricating vernix, zips over the surgical sheeting, which has the texture of a slip and slide, and almost rockets straight off the table. The baby's foot was caught by the reg, who whipped her up in the air upside down like in old cartoons, but almost dropped her again due to gloves plus vernix. Thankfully the midwife was ready with the towel and caught the baby to wrap her up. Mom and Dad seemed to think this was normal practice and didn't notice. But me and my colleague just stared at each other with a look of absolute horror. It still makes me shudder to think how close the baby was to hit the floor head first. Never happened before or since. Surgeon here. I've dealt with loads of morbid stuff, but one thing that made me stop and go, oh hit, was a conversation with a young patient who had a perforated colon from diverticular disease, which is a common wear and tear of the colon. He was one of the youngest patients I had seen with this condition, and certainly the youngest with a perforation so bad as to require an operation. When I was counseling him on the operation, which involves removing the perforated part of the colon and giving him a colostomy, he told me his biggest concern was how he was going to have sex with his same-sex partner. He would only have a small stump of rectum left inside, which would be at risk of perforation with any force applied to it. It made me really think about the implications of the surgery we do. The operation is the easy part. Fifth-year resident here. There are lots of bad oh-hit moments throughout training, such as necrotizing soft tissue infections, or take backs for back complications, or deaths during cases. However, I'd like to share a recent positive oh-hit moment. 15 centimeters kidney tumor with thrombus into the vena cava. Big incision. Great exposure of the vasculature and the tumor. My attending and I are dancing around the aorta and vena cava. We are able to feel the tumor thrombus in the IVC. I was expecting that we'd need to cut and clamp the vena cava to get all the cancer out, but my attending literally squeezes the tumor out of the vena cava back into the renal vein and then has me tie the renal vein off so the tumor doesn't slip back into the vena cava. The patient went home in like 4 days. Margins were negative and is still doing great. The first time I felt like oh hit. I'm a surgeon. Heard an oh hit moment as a patient on the operating table. A couple of years ago I was in labor for 28 hours, pushing for 6, when my child started showing signs of distress. He had a slightly elevated heart rate, and I had the makings of a fever. My midwife at the hospital told me the doctor was coming in to check to see if a vacuum assist could help. She checks me and immediately stands up with blood on her hand and says we're going to the OR. Now, at that time, I started feeling that zoomed out tunnel vision I know for me as a shock. I had anxiety but figured she knew what was best. She did. We got in the OR 8 minutes later, and when they opened me up, I heard the surgeon say, oh hit, look at this. They say blood in my catheter bag, and upon fully opening me, I found my son was actually trying to come through my uterus. He had ruptured it. They got my son out. Those moments where he was stunned and not crying was an eternity. He cried, and he was born a completely healthy baby. After I woke up, and was back in my room. The doctor came in and told me what happened. I knew a ruptured uterus sounded bad. But oh damn, I googled and started having a massive anxiety attack. A ruptured uterus is extremely rare, and so very dangerous and often fatal. I read from the time it happens you have about 15 minutes before you bleed out, and baby is dead. When I went back from my post-C-section follow-up, my midwife let me know as a practice that's been around 35 years with over 30 midwives and doctors, they had never once encountered that. And it was such a big deal for them. A few days after my birth, they all got together to discuss my case. I was so incredibly fortunate I chose to labor in a hospital that the doctor just knew from my vitals and babies that something was off. They just didn't know until they got me open. I can't even tell you how grateful I am for Dr. S. You saved my life, and my son's life, and our family will forever be grateful.